I'm joined here today by Noel Bruton. Hi, Noel.
How do you do?
Excellent. Right, so we've known each other for quite a few years, but I'm mindful that not everyone...
Decades, mate, decades.
Decades, yeah. So the SITS Insight and the SITS community might not necessarily know who you are, although I find that hard to believe. But let's introduce you anyway. Just tell us about what your background is and what you specialise in.
Okay. I'm a consultant and trainer who specialises in IT support management. Okay. I've been in IT support since 1979, where I started on mainframes. I ended up being a manager first in the mid 1980s, and then started winning national awards because there was no way of running IT support then, and we came up with this way, and it was extremely effective, so effective that blue chips were coming to ask us how we did it. And that prompted me to start the consultancy in 1991. And essentially what I do now, and what I have been doing really for the last 30 odd years, is going into organizations that are having difficulties in delivering IT support and showing them how to do it. And over that time, it's meant that I've had to develop a methodology for doing it consistently and doing it in a way that other people could take on board. I have to call it something. It's called the methodology for IT user support. It's there's two aspects to it. One, it's my approach to how I can quickly get a handle on what's going on with an IT support department I've been asked to help resolve, and also it's a methodology, for running IT support once I've gone, which I will be a few weeks from whenever the project starts. So I want to hand something over to them that is a step-by-step, do this followed by this, watch out for these statistics. If you see that number, it means this sort of way of approaching IT support at all levels, first, second line, and so on.
Why is there still need for guidance for running something that's now quite day-to-day, kind of run-of-the-mill, keeping the lights on element of a business?
You're absolutely right. We've moved on. Or maybe we haven't moved on at all. Because the fact is that IT is stuck in a kind of a whirlpool of necessity. It has to hire technicians, and technicians are not managers. And as a result, well, productivity has been steadily dropping in IT support for years, and nobody else seems to be able to do anything about it. Backlogs are a permanent feature of what they do, and they're not necessary. Fixed times are in days, or at least in hours, when they should be in minutes. And we've kind of not moved on. IT support should be a much more productive, successful, and let's face it, humanly rewarding place to be. I suppose we need to deal with the whole artificial intelligence thing of whether actually having computer-based portals for users to help themselves is a good thing. I'm not convinced that it is, and nor am I convinced that even if we do have the portals, that we can populate them with the information we need. Let's look at that in practical terms. I'm a user and my device has stopped working. My productivity has dropped to zero. What I've now got to do is to find a way of getting my device working again. Wrong. What I've got to do is to find a way of getting me productive again, because the only reason my job exists is in order to serve a need of the business. So I've got to go to IT support now, and they say, you can't phone us, you've got to look it up on our customer portal. So they go to the customer portal, and that now means that they have to spend time doing the diagnosis themselves based on what the customer portal has to offer. So they're losing even more productivity, and the company continues to lose even more money. If you think about it, imagine that the technician that they could have spoken to and the user themselves are paid more or less the same amount of money. But the user is producing on behalf of the business, and the technician is producing in order to be able to support the user. The user is costing up to 3 times as much in terms of his time as it would have cost the technician to fix the problem in the first place. Then we actually get to the portal itself. Who wrote it? Because let's say, for example, it's a case-based reporting tool. So it asks the question, what happens to be a problem? My screen goes blank. Okay. In that case, we go now through a series of questions to find out what he should do to fix his blank screen. What's the first question we ask if his screen's blank? Some might say, oh, well, is the screen plugged in? No, probably another question is there power to the building? Because, well, there you go. Because we can have that debate even on question 1. What's it like when you get down to question 14? The person who writes this customer portal must be somebody with unimpeachable logic and has to be able to write something that's absolutely perfect. Does it work for you?
We've got new tools. We've got new methodologies. You've said yourself that productivity on help desks is falling. Is this part of the problem, that actually we're looking in the wrong direction?
I'm absolutely convinced of it, yes. I'm absolutely convinced of it. IT support should be a much more efficient, much more productive, and much more enjoyable place to work than it is at the moment. At the moment, it's still too reactive. And there are lots of peculiar reasons for that, partly because of the culture. There's nobody figuring out what is the value of IT support, so we don't know whether we're spending too much or too little money on it. We don't know whether we're hiring too many or too few staff, because there's no obvious algorithm by which you can work that out. There is in my books, of course, but then that's what I do for a living.
When you're called in to go and fix a help desk, in crude terms, typically what have they been doing in order to improve the situation, and what is the problem that they're trying to fix?
Typically, there's nobody actually taking charge of the way the department as a whole operates. That's the typical one. In other words, it is supervised, but it's not managed, and there's nobody having actually designed the way the thing should operate, or perhaps the design, they just take it from whatever tool they've just bought and they just use that the way it comes out of the box. It should go like this. We have a population of users who have certain demands. From there, we invent services to meet those demands. From those services, we determine what skills we need. We then implement a skills program. And from the quantity of the demand, we then work out how many of each skill. At that point, we can hire staff. Most IT departments don't do that. They wait until they get too busy and hire somebody new. And they wait again until they get too busy and they hire somebody new. It's always reactive, rather than actually running it like a machine. The whole of this industry is oriented to think, or to perceive, that IT support stops at the service desk. You think of any other framework anywhere in IT that mentions the second line. They just don't. They don't consider it, because what happens is that it's been service desk since it first came to prominence in 2002. I know it was invented earlier than that, but that's when it first came to prominence. And everybody's been talking purely about the service desk ever since. And the service desk has fantastic tools, and it's got loads of people paying it attention. Terrific. And that's why the first line productivity and first line output is actually pretty well static. It's about as good as it can be in most organizations. But then what happens after that is, if the service desk can't fix it, they chuck it at another bunch of technicians, and this other bunch of technicians was actually constituted to do something other than support. So it might be working on projects, or it might be installing kit, or it might be maintaining networks, or it might be looking after telephone communications installations. It might be doing anything other than actual support, and it then gets a support inquiry. To them, the support inquiry looks like an aberration. So it's not really a surprise that those groups should not fix support inquiries as fast as they could, because they're not organized to do that. There are ways you can do it, of course there are, and that's what I teach. There's ways you can deal with all this without it impacting your projects. But that's the current culture, is that we've got all these skills elsewhere in IT. Hey, service desk, if you can't fix it, chuck it at them. But we've not told them what their support responsibilities are. They're expected to do it reactively.
Well, let's then think about MISD, and I think that was important to understand the context of why we need some kind of methodology. How does that start to fill in those gaps?
Okay. MISD is about two things. It's about professionalism and method. So in other words, it's how to do your job at every possible level that IT support may impact, from the new starter right the way through to the technician becoming a manager, through to the operational manager, through to the guy who's designing the IT support strategy. But it's also about this professionalism thing. And professionalism has its own problems in IT, because IT technicians don't want to see themselves as being customer service based sort of people. They're technicians, and so sometimes the idea of professionalism sits ill with them, and it shouldn't. I mean, there are ways of being professional even if you don't want to smile at the customer. There are ways of doing that. So that's the overall concept: professionalism and method, how you do your job and how you do it professionally. Here's a quick, for instance. This took me 2 days. I was called into a small MSP, and they were in a bit of a mess. They had a backlog that was constant. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They were all working flat out, providing various services, and yet nothing was getting better. And they were starting to lose staff because of the stress levels. So I did an analysis based on how the workflow worked, how people acquired their skills, how responsibilities were allocated, and came up with a framework, and just gave them an hour and a half's talk on it. Within a week, the backlog had vanished and it never came back. And everybody was enjoying their work more, and there was actually slack in the afternoons. It was just a matter of it needed to be managed rather than reacted to. We've had, probably since about 1997, we've had a certain set of terminology that's pretty much dominated the industry. And it's all very well, but it comes from the call center era, and it's all a bit committee designed. The word problem in IT is used to mean something completely different to what the users think a problem is. The users ring up with a problem. I've got a problem with my computer. Actually, no, you don't. You've only got an incident with your computer. and
it's so true, isn't it?
Yeah, and not only that, but you then take it a stage further. Well, what do you mean by incident? If a machine reports that a part is due to fail, then that's an incident. If a user rings up and says there's 250 of us here underwater, that's an incident. It's the same thing. It's the same definition. It's nonsense. If a user rings up and says, I cannot access the payroll system because I've forgotten my password, that's just a request. It's not an interruption to his productivity. So we've got this terminology, and it tells us absolutely nothing about what we should do about the request that's being made. So we've got all the wrong terminology. It doesn't define anything. It doesn't add anything to the support process. It's just words plucked out of the air with no real meaning. We should be much more astute and precise about our language. We're trying to design a machine to deliver a service, remember. You can't do that by saying the thingy over there. You have to know what that thingy is called so you can make sure it's the right type of thingy.